Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how we understand shapes, angles, and even how to navigate through a complex space? It turns out this ability, called geometric cognition, is pretty fundamental to how we think. And new research is giving us a fascinating glimpse into its origins and how it develops. This study explores geometric cognition, which is basically our brain's ability to understand shapes, distances, angles, and how things relate to each other in space. Think about reading a map, building something, or even just knowing if a room feels cramped or spacious. Geometry is at play. The researchers here wanted to figure out the core skills involved in this kind of thinking, how they start in our young minds, and what goes on in our brains to make it happen. They looked at evidence from people doing tasks, brain scans, computer models, and even studies across different cultures. So, does everyone just know geometry from birth? It is a question that goes way back to ancient philosophers. Modern science is exploring this idea too, suggesting we might have some built-in core knowledge about geometry. Imagine being able to see lengths and angles, or track how shapes move. Scientists tested this with a group called the Manduruk, an indigenous community in the Amazon who don't have a lot of formal schooling or geometry words. They asked them to spot the odd one out in a set of shapes based on geometric rules. What they found was pretty amazing. Both kids and adults could do it pretty reliably. And they made similar kinds of mistakes and showed similar pattern of abilities as people from Western cultures. This suggested that some basic geometric intuitions are shared across cultures, no matter what language you speak or how much school you've had. They also looked at babies who can't tell us what they're thinking directly. So researchers watched how long babies looked at things. If babies look longer at something new or different, it suggests they noticed it. By showing babies different shapes and changing them, they found that even very young infants, like 7-month-olds, are sensitive to basic geometric ideas like changes in length ratios. Even younger babies, around 4.5 to 6.5 months old, can tell apart different geometric arrangements, like the corners of a triangle. This suggests that our ability to understand shape-based geometry is there from a very early age, long before we learn about angles and lines in school. And here is another cool thing. This geometric sense isn't just about seeing. Studies with children and adults who were born blind showed they could still do similar shape and rule-based tasks using touch, performing above chance. While their performance was a bit lower than sighted people, it was similar to sighted people who were blindfolded. This points towards an abstract, a model, meaning not tied to one set of geometric tools we're born with. But geometric understanding isn't just about recognizing static shapes, it also comes from moving around in the world. Think about tasks where you have to find a hidden object in a room after you've been spun around. Studies show that young children rely more on distances and directions, like how far apart corners are or which way to turn, rather than things like wall color or shape. In a square room, they'd look in all 4 corners, but in a rectangular room, they'd focus on 2 corners that were further apart. This suggests that our navigation skills, our ability to find our way around, actually lay the groundwork for understanding formal geometry. So, we seem to have 2 main starting points for geometry, one for recognizing shapes, form analysis, and one for navigating spaces. Navigational system. Initially, these are separate, but they work together as we grow. Later on, things like maps and diagrams become really important. Even without formal education, children can use maps to find things. However, the way different cultures and education systems approach geometry can shape how we develop these skills. For example, understanding geometric transformations like rotating or reflecting shapes is challenging for many, and it is seen as a key step towards more advanced math. Being able to combine information from both our shape sense and our navigation sense is crucial here. Now, how do we actually think about shapes in our minds? It's not just like looking at a picture. We can recognize a drawing of a square even if its angles aren't perfectly sharp. This suggests we represent shapes as structured mental objects. One idea, called the language of thought hypothesis, proposes that we represent things like geometric shapes using mental programs made of basic building blocks. When you see a shape, your mind might be running a program that generates it. Think of it like building with Legos. We have basic shapes and rules, and we can combine them to create complex ideas. This theory helps explain how we can create endless new concepts by combining existing ones. Researchers have tested this by creating computer models that mimic these programs. For different shapes, these models have been surprisingly good at predicting how adults, kids, and even people without formal Western education would perform on various geometry tasks, from recognizing patterns to spotting intruders. The exact language or set of primitives that works best can even change depending on the person, suggesting we can learn and build new geometric words. Geometry has a long history with logical reasoning and proof going all the way back to ancient Greece. It is often how students first learn formal proof. This makes geometry a really interesting area to study how people think logically. One way experts prove geometric statements is by breaking down a problem into key steps, often focusing on visually obvious parts of diagrams. Another approach is diagram-based reasoning, where you make logical steps from looking at a geometric drawing. It seems like when people judge an inference as wrong, they often try to find a counterexample, a way to draw it that breaks the rule. However, there can be some surprising biases. For instance, people sometimes get tripped up by certain invalid inferences, especially when they involve scaling things like circles. Suggesting our built-in assumptions can sometimes lead us astray. So, what is happening in our brains when we do geometry? Brain imaging studies have pointed to some key areas. The intraparietal sulcus IPS and the superior parietal lobules PL are important for holding spatial information in mind and for mental transformations like rotating a shape. What is fascinating is that these same areas, along with another part called the right posterior inferior temporal gyrus, pitch light up not just when we see geometric shapes, but also when we hear about geometric concepts. The pitch is usually associated with recognizing objects visually, but its involvement in geometry suggests it's doing something more abstract. It seems to be helping us encode the underlying structure of geometric forms, even if we're not seeing them. This suggests that geometry builds on older brain circuits for space and shape, with the parietal areas handling spatial relationships and transformations, and the temporal areas getting more involved in the abstract structure of shapes themselves. It is like our brain is repurposing some of its visual tools for more advanced abstract thinking. So, what is next in understanding geometric cognition? There are still some big questions. How exactly do those early intuitive systems for shape and navigation merge into the abstract thinking needed for formal geometry? We know maps and diagrams are key, but we need to understand more about how language and culture shape this whole process. Another mystery is how geometry relates to our understanding of numbers. Do they share brain machinery, or are they built on partly separate, but maybe interacting systems for quantity? There is a huge gap between what we're learning about geometric cognition and how it is taught in schools. We know that practicing spatial skills helps with math, but why is still a bit unclear. Research on geometric cognition could help explain the underlying mental processes. And while we've mapped out some brain areas involved, we still need to understand how these networks develop and how they connect to other math areas like arithmetic. Understanding the overlap between geometry and arithmetic in the brain could reveal deeper principles of how we do math in general, maybe a universal capacity for structured thinking. Scrolly believe this research offers a brilliant peek into the fundamental ways our minds grapple with space and form. The idea that we have these innate geometric intuitions, refined by our experiences navigating the world and then further shaped by culture and education, is truly mind-boggling. It's like building a house. You start with the foundation, then add walls and a roof, and finally you decorate and make it your own. The Munduruk study, the infant research, and the brain imaging all paint a picture of how complex and yet how fundamental our geometric understanding is. One of the most exciting aspects is the link between the intuitive, sensory-based understanding and the abstract. Symbolic reasoning, the fact that the same brain regions are involved, whether we're looking at a shape or hearing a geometrical statement, is a powerful indicator of abstraction. It highlights how our brains can take concrete sensory input and transform it into general concepts that can be manipulated mentally. However, there are always limitations to consider. Most of these studies involve specific tasks, and it is always challenging to generalize findings to the full spectrum of geometric thinking. For example, while the intruder tasks are clever, they only test a specific aspect of geometric understanding. Also, the work on different cultural groups is vital. But it is important to remember that culture is a broad term, and there are many variations within groups and between individuals. The implications for education are massive. If we understand how children build geometric knowledge from the ground up, we can design better teaching methods that tap into those foundational intuitions, rather than just expecting rote memorization. The connection between spatial skills and math achievement across the board suggests that fostering spatial reasoning might be a universal key to unlocking mathematical ability. Looking ahead, I am particularly interested in how technology, like virtual reality, could be used to test and train geometric cognition in more immersive ways. Also, digging deeper into the language of thought for shapes could lead to even more refined computational models that help us understand how learning happens. It's a rich field, and this paper is a fantastic step in showing us how we build our sophisticated understanding of the geometric world around us. What do you think is the most fascinating part of geometric cognition? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the mind, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science decoded. See you next time for Scroll!